However, the requirements for working in them are quite stringent. It is very difficult for a newer firm, one that does not have capital, and especially one that does not have a compliance program that's fairly robust, to really make any headway whatsoever. That being said, I know there is several banks in the United States that work with these firms. But again, in taking a step back and going to de-risking, most banks don't even work with MSBs because those are high risk. Virtual currency on top of MSBs is even higher risk. So how you pull it off is that you have essentially you have a way of system that will mitigate the risk for the financial institution or bank. Therefore, they feel comfortable working with these virtual currency firms.
Over here, any thoughts?
I just think it's a tricky issue where it's going to shake out in the next couple of years. I think as the banks themselves get more involved with blockchain technology, there's R3CEV. Most major banks have joined this consortium. They will get more comfortable, but I do think, again, it's a cost-benefit analysis for the banks. How much does it cost us to comply and deal with our regulators versus how much benefit do we get from this customer? We all know Coinbase has banking and Circle has banking because they're big clients. I'm sure they have venture capitalists who help them get those banking relationships. So I think if you're an entrepreneur, one way to get a banking relationship is to work with your venture capitalists, if you have somebody, to see where they're banking and go to them. I also think a lot of the smaller banks, the more entrepreneurial banks, not just the city banks and the Bank of America's, the sort of smaller, mid-sized banks throughout the country, they are more open to this, and they're actually excited. They're interested. They're like, oh, this sounds cool. And you know what? We want to say we're in this field. And it may be a bank that surprises you, frankly. I've heard of banks, I don't necessarily always think of the Midwest as a technology hotbed, but I've heard of a lot of banks in the Midwest. Sorry, Joe, I know Chicago is.
That's all right.
But a lot of banks in the Corn Belt that are interested in doing this.
The Corn Belt. You're just
I know.
It's
This is
hard.
going
Yeah.
after.
I guess I would add to that, and so when my clients or prospective clients contact me and say, how do I get a bank account? Obviously it's a Google search. You have to find that bank that banks MSBs, and then as the panel alluded to, it's two steps. Some banks actually have in their URL /MSB, which says to me that they're probably dedicated in that space because banks don't usually take a lot of time to invest in their software and updating their website. So if they thought enough to create that section of their website, they're probably more into it for the long haul. So that might be one strategy to pursue. Jason,
Briefly, I'll point out that there's a trend that I noticed in the last year by one particular bank, a very powerful bank, that's not afraid of Bitcoin. And they're not servicing businesses, but they're accepting it for their individual clients, and that's USAA.
Yes.
Now links with Bitcoin. I'm a USAA member from my time in the Air Force, and I thought that was phenomenal that they would say, great, we'll go ahead and adopt this technology early. So maybe we'll see some more of that adoption and more acceptance in some of the other banks that won't be so afraid of it.
positive news for sure.
And just so everyone knows, you heard this term MSB being thrown around. That's a money service business, and traditional money service businesses that most people think of are like MoneyGram. And they have trouble getting banking. So it's not like the industry's being completely picked on by these banks, but money service businesses, like very traditional ones, they have real trouble keeping and getting banking also. So it's just a high risk area. At least that's what the banks perceive, and they're very wary.
Yeah, and they have lobbyists and industry groups that have gone to Capitol Hill before Bitcoin, so your point isn't lost. It's certainly not uphill battle. So we have about 10 minutes left. I kind of want to get the closing thoughts of the panel, and then certainly want to open up to questions, of which I'm sure there's no shortage. Sure. So anybody wanted to start here? Jason, you want to follow the sword?
Sure, I'll follow the sword. I did that a lot with the Shavers case. There's a couple of things I just wanted to go over, some of the cases that we're seeing over the last year, actually in the last month that have come out, just briefly. I think the most spotlight case that came out was the SEC versus Josh Garza, the GAW miners and Zen miner case. Everybody heard about that? How many people actually bought a hashlet? Anyone? There's one.
All right.
How many hashlets do you still own?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Doesn't
Probably
mean
zero at this point.
Probably zero at this point.
Complicated.
So hash, if you don't know, a hash is a unit of processing power. And so what the Garza case did, or what the Zen miner case did, is they sold units of processing power to be applied to a pooled mining operation. And so that's where the security came in, is that the hashlet was the security. right? So you pay money to receive a hashlet that you are then going to expect some form of profit to come out of through the efforts of others. So when you're thinking about raising capital or compliance, or you're saying, I need to raise money or do things along those lines, you're going to come up with the greatest, neatest ideas in the world. Or if you're an attorney and you have clients, your clients are going to come up with amazing ideas. And the hard part you're going to have is when you're looking at that client is telling them, no, you can't do that. Because of course they want to do it, right? So how can you control the client or control your own emotions to say, yes, I can do it if I do a few things? And that's the thing that I want to point out. Hashlets might have been okay if there had been a registration statement, if he'd actually not oversubscribed, if he'd gotten control of himself and not got greedy. Right? It's okay to sell a percentage of processing power if you do a Reg D filing with the SEC and a notice filing with your local state regulatory agency. All of those things can be done. But what I see in the entrepreneurial world, in the Bitcoin world, is everybody's in this race to get out right now. Get out in front with that idea. And that race to get in front can end up in serious issues. It's a $20 million case against Zen miners. That's just disgorgement, plus fines, penalties. And then what happens after this, Brian, after this case, when the SEC's done?
Well, I would just say in general, I think, without commenting on that case, I would just say in general, it's important to think about that law enforcement is always out there. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, I just get a letter from the SEC or I just get a letter from the CFTC and that's the extent of it. And, you know, there's always the possibility of a law enforcement action. The SEC is a civil law enforcement agency. So I think it's important that when if you get a letter or an inquiry, whoever you are, whatever circumstances, that you consult with an attorney promptly to make sure that you respond to it properly and understand what's at issue here. I've seen too often in my own shoes where a client calls me and explains the situation, and I go, okay, well, have you already talked to, what have you done? They're like, well, I already talked to them, and I already did these 5 things. You're like, whoa. Like, you know, you have rights, and you have, you know, you could be making statements that could be used against you later, depending on the situation. So I think it's really important for any entrepreneur in the space, you know, like I said, to comply with the law from day one, and if you get an inquiry, to consult with an attorney right away.
Well, and to expand on that, and I think also back to, was it race to get in front, I think is what?
Yes.
There's an ability from a compliance standpoint to race to get in front as well. Because how many companies do you think are actually going to the CFTC or the SEC voluntarily and saying, look, we read this, we're screwed, well, let's talk. And I can tell you right now, I know who they are because there's 5 of them. And I'm there with them. So I can tell you, if you are the first person there, they say, you know what, we screwed this one up. And we're probably going to actually not come after you, but thanks for coming in. Can we call you about other stuff? All of a sudden you become a resource. So you actually now, you're now the first one who is actually compliant, and you're the first one who's like, hey, we got a CFTC or SEC or whatever, it doesn't matter who it is, stamp of approval, and now we can actually take more customers. And don't tell me that investors aren't going to come in and say, hey, you guys have this and we're looking at this with another one. I'm going to go with the guy who's got a CFTC compliance mandate, right? I'm going to go with the guy who's, you know, it's like VeriSign, right? It's like I'm going to go with the VeriSign company, not the one that doesn't have any sort of, you know, security or SSL or anything. It's the same sort of concept. If you're the guy that's got the compliance piece, you're going to beat everybody else to the front. And that's kind of what I'm seeing a little bit more, particularly again with the federal regulators. So I think that it actually creates an opportunity, not sort of just a way to kind of shut everybody down.
Yeah.
So I'm going to break here and say it's not as bad as we've all made it seem. It's actually really easy, and this is how it goes. If you're starting out, work with someone beginning. You know, make sure you're working with someone who is an expert, so that you know what you're doing. And that will make your life easier, because then you can approach banks and say that you have a compliance plan, that you're doing the right thing, you've always been doing the right thing. And banks who have a huge amount of pressure from their regulators can then go and say, yes, we're working with a higher risk client, however, they're doing these things to mitigate the risk, therefore we will feel comfortable working with them. That's it.
Yeah, I have to agree as well. I guess we're all pretty much enforcing compliance on all of you guys here. But it makes everything a world of difference. What I always say to people, especially when I was practicing, like, when you're a lawyer, when people come to you, they say, oh, I've stuffed up, can you help me now? It's like, well, had you seen me before, I could do a world of difference, but now you've given me like this much room to move around. So compliance from that perspective is so much better. Like, if you can work with them from day one, tell them, okay, these are your paths, you can pick 1, 2, or 3, and tell them which way they should go, then you shouldn't have to run into any trouble later on. And as Neela said, pretty much if you've done it from the start, then you're not going to have any other crimes down the road. And you can tell them, look, I need some help, what should I be doing here? And you are quite a valuable resource from that point of view. And I guess the result of that is seeing governments now pretty much having quite widespread legislation just to make sure that they capture it all. So if everyone complies from the start, then it just makes a lot of difference, I guess.
Very good. Well, very positive close. With that, we'll take questions, but in the meantime, a round of applause for our panelists, please. Great.
Questions? Go to him first.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Larry, and I'm really far away. I'm living out north of here. Question, it's a two-part question. I think I heard you say that Citibank is creating its own cryptocurrency, and if that's... Oh, sorry. And if that's the case, will its price float freely? And if that's the case, could Citibank be accused of creating a Ponzi scheme?
No, because they've got fantastic lobbyists, so there's that one. But so they actually created it. It's called Citicoin, and I'm not really sure if they've released it or if it's just sort of in beta. I mean, I think it was like within the last 6 months. But during their introduction, they brought in somebody actually from Australia who's heading up City Labs. What's that? Yeah, and that's it. And so I think the idea is that they're gonna be covered in any sort of compliance area. I mean, I don't think it's gonna be a Ponzi scheme necessarily, because it'll be open to any of their customers. So that's open, sort of, right? I mean, I'm just theoretically. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm trying to think through what they're.
Not that that was offensive or anything.
Right? No. Right.
Thank you.
Hello. I recently went through a lot of, as a layperson, a lot of the recent regulation as the CFTC came up and announced that they are they have regulatory authority over Bitcoin. And it appears as if they failed to read even the white paper in the Bitcoin wiki. I don't see how they can regulate it as a commodity without taking into consideration the programmability in the blockchain. I remember you saying that Australia has a taxation of capital gains tax in a flat 10%. Let's assume, I'm going to recall, pardon me. Let's assume that you enter into a contract. The value of that small contract goes up X% with the value of the Australian dollar or the Australian currency. How is that taxed? Is it taxed as Bitcoin, as a security, or the Australian currency?
Well, actually, will be taxed as both. So what they do is you've got the exchange, so you've got, sorry, I forgot what the example was, but you've got pretty much a transfer of money. They treat that as a transfer of property, not so much transfer of money. So straight away, whatever you're doing, you're getting taxed 10% goods and services tax. And let's say because you're holding the Bitcoins and the price did go up, for that duration that you've held it, until you sell it, they'll incur a capital gains tax on top of it.
Okay. But the issue is, suppose you don't sell it, we enter in a contract.
Yeah.
You assume that the Australian peso will go down. I assume it's going to go up. One of us are wrong, one of us are right.
Yeah.
My Bitcoin account, I accrue more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Am I taxed by the increased amount of Bitcoin?
Even if you don't sell the Bitcoin, just hold it, you'll be taxed as well. But this is the thing with tax laws. They need to be designed so it's simple. Because what's happening now is the only way is that, people are laughing.
Yeah.
I'm
Very
sorry, did
straightforward.
you say the tax law should be simple? I'm still trying to recover from that.
I know,
Mind-blowing
the tax
idea.
legislation itself is dyslexia. Okay, so the principle behind a good tax law, I would phrase that, good tax law, is that it will be simple, basics, transparent, there's a whole bunch of characteristics. And the one that really struggles for Australia and I guess in the world is the fact that it is not simple. You can't characterize it. Bitcoin blockchain, they're having huge issues with characterizing it. And so what's going to happen in Australia is right now, the laws are in, everyone needs to abide by it, but let's say I have 20 grand of Bitcoin. Who's going to know that? And if I'm a nobody, who's really going to know I'm holding 20 grams of Bitcoin? It's not like I carry it around, it's physical, I spend it or use it. If I just want to purely hold it and the value goes up to $40,000, then it's up to me in my tax return to say, well, I held Bitcoins, it was 20, now it's $40,000, so let me opt in and write it in for you, and you can tax me. It's going to have to be an opt-in policy, which is it's too hard for them to actually, find everyone, tax everyone, so it's not going to work. So
And wouldn't the same work in reverse? I took a $450,000 Bitcoin loss. I now want to apply that gain, that taxable loss for the next 5 years.
Yes.
And then I enter into a contract with somebody else and I trade that taxable loss with him.
Yeah.
Now, how is that taxed?
Again, you'll need to opt in and say, we did a transaction and now we need to be taxed for it.
But my point is, you do opt in because now you have a tradable asset, which is a tax loss.
Yeah.
Is that tax loss traded as a taxable gain, even though it's a loss? You can take that tax loss, it becomes an asset, that trade. There's too many different ways. There's just, when the regulators create legislation from a layman's perspective, and it could be the problem, you have to at least read the directions on the stuff that you're regulating.
Reggie, I think everybody here knows you're not necessarily the general layman.
Another question, Simon?
Well, I was just going to say that in America, you have the tax as well, you just treat it like stock. Same thing, stock, gains and losses.
That's fine.
Yeah,
It's
well,
here as well.
in the US, it's property for the IRS, and I think the interesting thing is a lot of people have difficulty with this idea. Oh, okay, for the CFTC, it's a commodity. For the IRS, it's property, and then for FinCEN, it's currency. How can it be all these things at once? Well, I think one of the things we all would say about Bitcoin is it actually is kind of a lot of things at one time. To me, it's not that surprising that these regulators have found ways to fit it into what they want to do, and it's not surprising that the taxing authorities want to tax it. So I think, whether the CFTC or FinCEN or IRS move their definitions around or adjust them, I think that's very possible. I think as things develop over the next couple of years, we'll get more clarifications, we'll get more guidance. I think, for example, the IRS should have a minimum transaction that you can do under $10,000 and it's not taxed, because it's just really crippling in a way. People just buy coffee every day to have to figure out the taxes. But again, I think this is an evolving process, and I think that's, it's hard for everybody to stay on top of it. It's hard. You can't follow every agency, and then you got to worry about what's happening globally too. So it all depends.
Hi, I'm Carol Van Cleve, and I'd like to, it's been a very interesting conversation, and I'd like to, if I could, offer a couple points of clarification. Jason had mentioned about USAA offering Bitcoin accounts or services to customers.
It's a connection through Coinbase, yeah.
Right. It's important to note there that that's to individuals, that USAA is not banking companies in the
I
Bitcoin
believe I said
space.
that, but yeah, thank you.
Second, on the MSB issue, as people are looking at MSBs as potential, looking at banks, bank MSBs, is a lot of banks distinguish between whether they're banking a licensed entity or the agent of a licensed entity. So understanding the bank that you're approaching is going to be very important in what their approach is with respect to the banks. And to the gentleman's comment over here, I would just say that for the layperson reading the law, that can be a tricky path, and that more of the problems are created more often because the layperson reads the law. And yes, the law is pretty clear on its face, but the regulators always come up with some other kind of interpretation around that. And unfortunately, there are people who've gone to jail and people who have lost their livelihood as a result of that. So I think Brian's comment about making sure you talk with counsel is a very important element. Thank you.
Cool. Time for one last question over here.
Thank you for the talk. I'm Shaban from Switzerland, and I have a question. So we are a game company, and happens that we issue our game asset on blockchain. So regulators have a hard time understanding Bitcoin. So when it comes to digital assets that are stored on the Bitcoin, is it considered as a currency? So should we look at the currency regulation? But at the same time, it's not a currency, it's just an asset that is on blockchain.
I think when you start talking about that, you kind of blow regulators' minds a lot of times, because that's just a whole different area. You know, like there was talk about trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Now you're talking about like a star peg and then like a tiny little hole. I mean, it's just, you're on the forefront of things, and I think, you know, that's a very interesting question, and it's definitely not resolved, and I don't think these agencies are ready to, frankly, have issued much guidance on these things. I know they're engaged in dialogues and are interested in them. I think it was announced today or yesterday that the Department of Homeland Security has funding some blockchain technology. I think it's a internship or grants or something. So I think there's a lot of interest here. But you're definitely at the legal forefront. My advice would be to consult with an attorney.
Shaban, just one moment. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. Is the game itself housed within a colored coin, or is it just a result or some value? What exactly are you doing there?
It's like a colored coin, it's counterparty.
Sure.
So we tag a tiny fraction of Bitcoin and we say this is